The senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to go back a little further in history than last year's warmed over conspiracy theories that we just heard my friend from Iowa talk about. I so appreciated Senator Bennett's discussion of sort of the history of voting rights and the history of this body. The American public certainly doesn't know what cloture means. The American public really doesn't know all that much about the filibuster either. But go back a few decades. The filibuster was used to suppress the vote. The filibuster was used by many people in my political party back when too many Democrats were on the wrong side of history and the wrong side of civil rights. It was used by Southern segregationists. It was finally overcome by some Northern Republicans with a whole bunch of Northern Democrats. But then think what else the filibuster has been used for. The filibuster was used in the 1970s and 1980s to protect big tobacco in Kentucky. Or the filibuster was used to protect big oil. Now it's used to protect Wall Street. The filibuster is used to protect big tech companies. The filibuster is used in case after case after case to protect big drug companies. So we know that the whole purpose of the filibuster has been to protect the most affluent, the most privileged, the wealthiest corporate interests in this society that just get their way in this body day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. Now, this weekend, and many referred to this, we honored Dr. Martin Luther King. We heard a lot of words extolling his legacy. Those words from many who are, for whatever reason, not supporting voting rights today, those words sounded pretty empty. Few people told the story of Dr. King in Memphis, why Dr. King was in Memphis. In early February of 1968, sanitation workers in Memphis, some of the most abused, taken advantage of workers in our country, mostly black workers doing a dirty, difficult job in a segregated city with a very racist mayor who let that be known in the ensuing months. These sanitation workers were not even given rest periods, particularly when they were in white neighborhoods. There was nowhere to go when they were picking up the garbage in white neighborhoods, in segregated white neighborhoods. There were no place to go for the rest periods. Two workers in early February in a rainstorm got in their garbage trucks to protect themselves from the rain for a few minutes. The garbage truck malfunctioned, those two workers, underpaid with no real benefits and no insurance and no help for their families. Those two workers were killed. Dr. King went to Memphis the first time to help lead that strike, to join the striking workers. The second time he went back, and that's when he was assassinated. Dr. King understood the dignity of work was intertwined with voting rights. Worker rights and voting rights always went together. Dr. King insisted no job is menial if it pays a decent wage. And those sanitation workers, as I said, low wages, no benefits, no health insurance, no retirement, none of that, few days off. Dr. King said, what does it profit a man to be able to eat at an integrated lunch counter if he doesn't earn enough money to buy a hamburger and a cup of coffee? He talked about the dignity of work, the term mostly popularized by him, and he said, as no work is menial if it pays an adequate wage. Until all workers have dignity in their job, Dr. King's work will remain unfinished. We can't get there if workers cannot vote. I don't mean just workers who put on a tie and sit at a desk. The vote should be open to everyone. I mean all workers. Whether you punch a clock, whether you swipe a badge, whether you work for tips, whether you're on salary, whether you're raising children, whether you're taking care of aging parents. We know who powers our economy. It's workers. It's not the rich donors and the corporate contributors that fund the politicians who are pushing for gerrymandering and voter suppression in the takeovers of local electoral boards. It's workers. I think about what we did in the Senate last week. With some difficulty, but ultimately it worked, we unanimously passed a resolution honoring the custodians and the maintenance workers. We had talked often about the police officers, some of whom gave their lives, dozens who were injured, all who were courageous. We honored them as we should. We also last week, though, passed a resolution honoring custodial workers and maintenance workers. They get little recognition. They work for too low pay. Last January, 1 year ago, these workers, largely black and brown workers, many of them immigrants, were forced to clean feces off the wall, clean up after the destruction of the white supremacists, and restore dignity to our capital after domestic terrorists ransacked it. The insurrectionists destroyed, the black and brown workers cleaned up, the carpenters and the maintenance workers and the painters, union members all rebuilt. Last week, we came together to honor their service. They deserve more than words, more than gratitude. So often, they and other working people don't have much of a voice in this country. They don't have the high-priced lobbies to come here. Many of you have looked down the hall and seen in front of Senator McConnell's office, you've seen the lobbyists lined up who always seem to get what they come for. Workers don't have corporate lobbyists. They aren't going on campaign donor retreats. But workers have the vote, or should have the vote. The voting booth is where all of us are supposed to have an equal voice. The voting booth is where workers are supposed to be able to go to hold the wealthy and the powerful accountable. So it's not surprising that politicians who pass corporate tax cuts, the same politicians who do the handouts to the wealthiest 1%, don't want lots of workers to vote. We know who voter suppression and election subversion is aimed at. It's at the parents working 2 jobs to pay the rent and make sure their kids have a decent meal with no control over their work lives and their work hours if they don't have a collective bargaining agreement. It's students, it's people who don't get a day off, it's seniors in nursing homes, it's home health care workers who care for them. So often these are women of color working the graveyard shift after coming straight from their second job. We know whose votes these politicians want to throw out after they're cast. We know which cities the former president went after. What is Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Senator Casey, and Atlanta, Georgia, Senator Ossoff and Warnock? What do they have in common? They're diverse places with a whole lot of black and brown workers who cast ballots that the rich and powerful don't like. Ultimately, as others have said, it comes down to this. These politicians want to cherry pick their voters rather than the voters picking their elected officials. Through gerrymandering, through voter suppression, through meddling in local election board, politicians want to pick and choose whose votes are counted. My state, President Trump carried my state twice by 8 points. My state, though, is about a 53, 54, 46, 47, slightly Republican state now. For the last decade, the members of Congress in my state, 12 Republicans, 4 Democrats. In 2012, and 14, and 16, and 18, and 20. None of that changed. Not one of those districts changed because Republicans, with their corruption and with their skill at drawing maps, drew those maps in ways that there was no real fair elections. We know whose votes they don't want to count. It's the votes of low-paid and the overlooked, the votes of workers who power this country, yet don't have much power. The votes of people who might hold politicians accountable, who might demand fewer tax cuts for rich people and an increase in the child tax credit, in the earned income tax credit, the largest tax cut for families in our nation's history. 90% of families in Colorado, in Georgia, in New Jersey, in Ohio, and all over this country, 90% of families with children get at least a $3,000 tax cut because of what we did in this body when we said no more Republican freight trains carrying tax cuts down the track. We were going to give tax cuts to moderate income people and working families. These votes of people who hold politicians accountable, the votes of people who understand the dignity of work. If you say you support American workers, you support their right to vote. I ask my colleagues of both parties come together to protect the right of every American to have a voice in this country, no matter who you are, no matter where you work, no matter where you live. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from North